Hey churches, I'm here with Dan Hylden, and Dan, you have a unique role and responsibility and can help our churches in a very unique way. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I was with the International Mission Board for 33 years doing international audits for our board all over the world. And after I retired from that, I'm still with the International Mission Board, but I help churches with financial accountability and training for their bookkeepers and helping them in case there is fraud, which happens occasionally. I do the investigations for those.
Wow. And, we'd like to think that in our churches, everything is always on the up and up and up front. We want to believe the best in people. We should believe the best in people.
Yeah.
But sadly, sometimes our structures create an opportunity for people to almost in a way fall into, we don't fall into sin, but we make it easy for people.
Yeah.
And so you were giving me a statistic about how many churches probably have some level of fraud going on.
Well, the current statistics put out by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, of which I am one, they say that 1 out of 8 religious organizations are currently experiencing fraud. My experience in Texas and around the world is about 90% of churches at some point in their history had fraud going on in their churches. The sad thing is there's very little external accountability to protect their church, protect their staff, protect their finances. And most people most churches kind of rely upon financial statements that come to their finance committees, but none of those are ever verified. And so it's really hard on a church when their staff member commits fraud and they didn't offer them help up front, and they go through a terrible time in their life. The church goes through a terrible time, but we can prevent that if we do some preventative maintenance with that church.
Yeah, so a lot of times it's like many other things, we wait until there's a problem to get help. But the best thing we can do is put up preventative measures to keep us from needing help. Even
as a church, you should at least have a once-a-year Bible study, really focusing in how do we be stewards that worship God through the whole process, from the time we ask for the money all the way through we get it, we receive it, we spend it, we account for it, and we get an external report that looks at did we do it correctly according to what the church voted on. But a lot of times worship ends up being just up front. Respect of the laws, about 90% of the churches that I audit within the state of Texas are doing illegal transactions of some sort. We don't always appreciate the laws that govern nonprofit organizations. So we need to appreciate our staff and protect them. And so I want to do all 4 of those things for a church to help them understand how to do it.
Yeah, you and I were talking about one that's just very common, and it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it could become a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's donations to pastors or people going on mission trips or something like that. Explain a little bit about how something like that might work.
Sure.
This will give everyone an example of some of the things you look for.
So the number one reason that nonprofits lose their nonprofit status is what's called pass-through donations. That's where a nonprofit like your church takes in some money and they give a tax-reducing receipt for that donation. But then they end up giving that to let's say an orphanage or a food bank or something else. They just distribute that money out, but they don't exercise authority over the final expenditure of those funds. Therefore, that is an illegal transaction. You have to exercise authority by having a member on a board or by asking for financials from that company with a copy of their audit report, something like that. But like I'm doing a mission trip to Spain. A church just sent me a check for air travel and for my meals and my hotel. I'm very grateful, but they didn't ask me to send back receipts to show that I actually spent the monies for the purpose intended. And I think that's one of those things where all of a sudden now it looks like I received an income of $2,500 that I may have to report on my income tax. Or if they could have just paid directly to the travel company and got my hotel taken care of, my travel taken care of, and then they would have exercised authority over the final expenditure of those funds. I hope that makes sense.
It does make sense. In other words, we have to give an accounting for the final receipt of that money. So
food banks are normal like that. You want to help a food bank in your local town, so a lot of us just send $400 a month over there. Instead, what we could do is we could go to a local grocery store. we could find out what the food bank needs. We could buy 30 cases of canned goods and actually pay for it and have the canned goods sent over to the food bank. They would get the food they need. You'd be able to protect your finances by having the receipt in your file. It's just a very easy way to get around it, but a lot of churches just send money.
Yeah. So, but you could also have someone on the board. So if you have someone on the board of directors who's helping oversee
then you're
the final
it's just
receipt on that.
The IRS has this Internal Revenue Code, and there's a certain number that talks about pass-through donations, and we just need to be careful of that.
So it's just one example of some of the things that you're trying to help churches do better business and protect our long-term interest. And so it's not just about trying to catch the wrong, it's about encouraging the right.
Man, if we can get ahead of it, Alan, if we can get out there and say, how do we protect? How do we give continuing education to our bookkeepers? How do we help finance committees actually understand their role? So many times we trust our bookkeepers to do the books, and they should be trusted. But it is not their role to give accountability back to their church. That is the role of your finance committee. The finance committee can either do their own internal audit, which I love training people how to do internal audits. So I could do that for your finance committee, sit down, meet with them, show them what to look for, or they could ask someone like me to come in and help them do an external committee, which will protect their staff. It will educate their staff, and it'll give your church a greater trust level.
So if a church wanted to train their finance team or committee, which is what you want to do, you don't want to just work with a bookkeeper, you actually want to work with the whole team.
Yeah.
How would they reach out to you, and how would you set something up?
Well, you have a missions director in your association. Contact Alan. Say, Alan, you talked to that guy, Dan. Could you give us that contact information? Alan has my contact information. And again, this is my livelihood. I do it as a living. But if any church cannot afford me, I still will help them. Because it is up to the church how much they pay me. I would send them an invoice, and the church can vote as a missions committee or a finance committee and say, we'd like to give you $400. Great. Whatever the church decides is what I take.
And don't forget, some of it maybe we're a small church. We partner with a couple other churches in your area and get 2 or 3 finance teams together. I mean, there's a great way for us to share. That's why we do these things. We want to do ministry together. We want to do ministry well. We want to protect your church, protect your ministry. These are trying days, and we never know what the landscape's going to look like, but you also want to protect those people who are walking along with your resources from the temptations that come their way as well. So anyway, Dan, I think it's
one more thing.
Conversation.
If your finance committee ever wants to discuss with somebody, ask Alan. I'll be glad to see what's on my schedule and come out and maybe Alan and I could come together and we could meet with your finance committee and talk about their role and responsibility and how they could do their job even better than what they're doing it now.
Absolutely. I love to talk to teams and about effectiveness of our teams and committees, and so that we'd love to do that. So anyway, I think this is a really important conversation. Churches, we love you, we want to protect you, and certainly here's one resource to help you out. Dan, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Al. God bless.
Thanks for having this conversation with me today.
You're welcome.